So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. Grant Wilson is the Executive Director and Directing Attorney of the Earth Law Center, a leading rights of nature organization. He is a visionary leader and leading expert in international law, environmental law, and ecological-based laws. He's fought boldly for the health of rivers, forests, and other ecosystems for 15 years. He has helped write laws recognizing nature as a subject of rights throughout the world and is a lead editor of a law school casebook on Earth Law. So if you are going to be taking any of our future courses here at Berry, keep an eye out because that's going to be the book guiding us through those. So prior to the Earth Law Center, Grant led environmental law and policy campaigns throughout the world in Kenya, Hungary, and elsewhere. He has also written numerous law journal articles and has spoken as an environmental expert at over 30 events worldwide. So we're very happy to have Grant Wilson with us today to lead our discussion on ecosystem rights. And I will turn the floor over to Grant.
Thanks. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you everyone for having me today. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint in just a second, but I just wanted to kind of give you an agenda. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of background into the rights of nature movement and why it's happening and where. But I think you've already had some background in that topic, or at least some or many of you have. And so after I just do that for a basic overview, I'll jump into some case studies of stuff Earth Law Center is working on with the hope I can provide some insider tips and quips and strategies for how to advance new legal movements. So whether or not you're interested in the rights of nature or ecological law, maybe something else totally unrelated is your passion project, and hopefully you'll have some ideas about how to establish that in the legal system through my case studies. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And I certainly won't talk the full allocated time, hour and a half. So it'll be, under an hour and with plenty of time for Q&A. Can people see my screen and nothing else? Hopefully the PowerPoint. If I don't hear otherwise, okay, I see thumbs up. Thanks. Okay, so just quick review of the rights of nature movement. The reason it's happening all over the world is because advocates have realized more than ever that our legal system is one of the primary drivers of the global environmental crisis. And I would say the global environmental crisis is the natural or expected result of what would happen when you implement a legal system such as ours. And the reasons are nature is defined as property or a commodity under the law. And in fact, the law encourages, if not requires us to exploit this commodity, nature, to the maximum extent allowable under the law up until some insufficient limits that we have. Nature doesn't have a voice in government. We know that. It's represented indirectly sometimes by people like me, but it has no formal voice. And we have environmental laws that treat the symptoms, but not the disease. And you have to read Professor Stewart's chapter in our Earth Law textbook to learn all about that. But I'll give you a couple examples here. The Clean Air Act, it's been fought in the Supreme Court over whether it protects air quality regardless of economic interest, and the answer is no. The Clean Air Act, considers economic interests, and that's one of the factors they look at. And so it's really clean air to the extent that's still profitable for companies. The Endangered Species Act, only kicks in once a species is on the very verge of extinction. And I've been in these meetings where they're talking about salmon species that are could go extinct, and they're talking about maybe a dam project or diversions from a river, and they'll show a graph that says, well, there's only a 5% chance this isn't going to work, and it could cause this extinction of this local salmon species, and they'll go ahead with the project. Imagine if instead it was the Thriving Species Act, in which you're actually encouraging healthy populations of animals, not just protecting them once they're on the very verge of collapse, which is the status quo. Real quick, all due respect to these laws. Were we to not have these laws from the 60s and 70s in the United States, every river would be drained, every lake would be dead, we'd have a heck of a lot more extinction. So the laws have slowed down the tide of degradation, but the flaws I'm pointing out are why we don't have actually healthy ecosystems, which is the goal I want to talk about today. And then Clean Water Act, let me talk about a couple shortcomings there. just some specific ones. You see on the left there, there's a what's called a navigable waters protection rule under the Clean Water Act. If a stream or a wetland is, they call it ephemeral or intermittent, it's seasonal basically, it receives no protection. So those under the Trump administration, so those two water bodies on the left have no protections. And then also under a Supreme Court ruling, Rapanos, wetlands that are not hydrologically connected to navigable water, such as on the right there, also receive no protection. So the Clean Water Act is really about protecting navigable waters. I mean, you can literally navigate it with a boat. And that's kind of the history of the Clean Water Act, as much as water protection is, ensuring commerce can exist on waterways. And so wouldn't a better approach be to protect an entire wetland and to ensure its integral ecological health as a whole system, instead of looking at nature as these different parts? Another fatal flaw with the Clean Water Act is that it, at least as applied currently by most states, isn't being used to protect low flows, over diversion, and an onslaught of dams on waterways. Even though the Clean Water Act itself says it applies to physical characteristics of water, it's not being used to literally dry waters to death, as in this waterway here, the Santa Ana River in California, where people walk out with buckets when there's low flows in this river to scoop up fish that are endangered, so they don't go extinct. And I don't think this is the system that's going to solve the ecological crisis. We need new holistic laws that are more protective. And so, many laws in different countries are similar to the ones we have in the United States. There's clean water laws, endangered species laws that don't do too little too late, and so forth. And all these environmental laws are framed within the context of our economic system, which they wouldn't dare challenge. And the result of this, you've all seen this, lost about 70% of animal populations in 50 years. Rivers are not flowing freely. The Amazon is just being devastated. Reefs could be totally wiped out. And of course, in humans, we see cancer, birth defects, respiratory disease, and so forth. 7 million people per year dying due to air pollution globally. Okay, so can rights of nature, this new emerging legal movement, possibly solve all of this madness? Let me tell you what it is. Rights, as you probably heard already, rights of nature is a movement to recognize that nature has its own inherent rights, just as humans do. It gives nature a voice in government. And it's sort of the DNA of a new legal system based on respect and living in harmony with nature. So I'd say it's kind of an underlying principle or an operating system if you're a techie. So just a couple basic elements about it. One thing I want to point out is really the goal of current environmental laws is to reduce degradation. And when you have that negative goal, less degradation, what you see is that you still have degradation, you still have unhealthy ecosystems. Rights of nature, by contrast, is about thriving ecosystems. It's about restoration, which, by the way, is the goal, the UN goal of this coming decade is restoration, or the theme, ecosystem restoration. And it gives nature a seat at the table. Might seem a little radical to some of you, but really, if you take a look at history, rights are always evolving. It was women are alive today who weren't allowed to vote when they were born. The last former slave was thought to have died only in the 1970s. It wasn't that long ago slavery as an institution was legal. Our societal values and norms shift. And I think right now, during this immense ecological crisis that we're experiencing, our societal values and norms are shifting, and rights of nature is a way to reflect those in the law. I just want to give you a couple more examples of, what's the difference between environmental law and earth law or rights of nature. Let's go down to number 3. I think this one's important. We'll talk about it more later. Right now, it's typically legal to pollute. You just get a permit to do it. Or if you pollute too much beyond that permit, there's some financial penalties. Oftentimes they're civil, once in a while criminal. But, for example, after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the biggest marine oil spill in human history, nobody spent a single day in jail. And, consider that to millions of people spending time in jail for, having small amounts of marijuana, for example, versus committing ecocide of an entire ecosystem where nobody was put in the slammer. I do believe in restorative justice, but the contrast is just is shocking. Under a rights of nature or earth law approach, ecocide is a crime. If you're a big oil or mining company and you destroy an entire ecosystem, that's a major criminal offense, and you're going to be held accountable for that. And that should be true internationally as well as within domestic court systems. And we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. And of course, I just want to quickly mention how are ecosystems represented in a rights of nature approach in the fourth point there. There's lots of ways you can do it, and I'll mention a couple later, but guardianship is one way to do it. There's actually proposals out there to give voting rights to nature, and there's some really interesting scientific ways that you can do that. One of which is actually measuring stress levels of ecosystems, and if a certain activity causes higher stress levels in ecosystems, that's a no vote for that activity, and that would be represented through a proxy. And check out the work of Jonathan Keats. He's a philosopher and experimental artist who's really exploring how to integrate nature, not only in our legal system, but into our culture and voting systems, and really create a ecocentric future. I'll talk a little more about rivers later on, so I'm going to skip this for now. So globally, I think you heard about this, but based on this background, over the last 12 years, there's just been an explosion of rights of nature precedent all over the globe. And when you consider other rights-based movements, women's rights, rights for certain minority groups, indigenous rights, these movements are taking centuries to be put into place, and we're still fighting for those rights in the courts. And so, the rights in nature movement, I think, has really moved spectacularly fast over the last decade. Myself and Professor Stewart have been fortunate enough to witness this immersion and to be part of it. But it's really exciting. And some of the ways I'll just highlight quickly, and then we'll get into some case studies where I can provide some insider information. But the ways it has been emerging are through a mix of constitutional amendments, court decisions, state and local ordinances, and also indigenous laws embracing rights of nature concepts, although I wouldn't call it that, because really it's just a manifestation of their indigenous law and asserting that through our Western legal system, and it has a lot of commonalities with the rights of nature. So I think currently rights of nature has been recognized in 12 countries to some extent. And I wouldn't be surprised if in a year it's up to almost 20, and the year after that 25 or 30. And again, I won't spend too much time here, but nationally, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Uganda have recognized the rights of nature, Ecuador in its constitution. Bolivia just elected a new president who I'm hopeful will really enforce their rights of nature laws. Back in 2012 and 14, Bolivia passed these rights of Mother Earth laws. They helped create this Harmony with Nature initiative in the UN. It was really exciting, and then they kind of dropped the ball on it. I think mainly due to having various urgent issues in their country, which is something we could talk about later, how to reconcile that with rights of nature. But I'm hopeful with this new president, they really pick it back up. And the first thing Bolivia has got to do is appoint a defensora, or defender of the rights of Mother Earth. It's an office who's tasked with defending and upholding nature's rights. Last year, Uganda became the first country in Africa to recognize the rights of nature and its environmental law. And in Ecuador, where it's been in its constitution, I'll mention a case a little later, but nature's been in the courts fighting for its rights through legal organizations who are defending them. There's been a mix of wins and losses. There's been a case where they ordered the restoration of a river, the Vilcabamba. There's been a case where they put some members of a fishing boat in jail for committing illegal fishing in a protected area, and both of these are in enforcement of nature's rights. So it has been working in the courts. But then there's been cases where it's fallen short, and the courts have said, well, industry has rights too. So it's a work in progress, but again, I think we need to be patient with the movement, because rights-based movements do take a little bit of time to be fully enforced, as we see in the United States with all sorts of rights-based movements that are still coming to fruition. So in addition to, blanket rights of nature laws, we see specific ecosystems having rights. The Wanganui River is a legal person in New Zealand. And this is really a manifestation of an indigenous rights and belief system with the Wanganui iwi, who are Maori people. So I wouldn't even call this rights of nature. I'd call this, indigenizing the law. Or asserting indigenous rights. But this river is a person. There's a co-management board between the Maori and the New Zealand government to manage the river and enforce its rights. And importantly, because the rights of nature movement has no money. So if you're sitting on a pot of money and want to do something really exciting for the world, I think supporting rights of nature is a great investment. But importantly, with New Zealand, they gave 30 million bucks in their local currency, 20 million US to enforce this, which I think is one of the reasons it's been a great case study. We see courts all over the world saying, if we don't have a national law or constitutional amendment on the rights of nature, but what the hell? Nature has rights because that's an inherent quality. Humans have rights inherently, and our laws just formalize that. Similarly, judges are starting to say nature has rights inherently, and we're going to formalize that through this landmark ruling. With the Atrato case, this river was devastated by gold mining, both legal and illegal, and the court said, we're going to recognize its rights in part based on the biocultural rights of local communities. So kind of this idea that, people living along the river have this deep cultural relationship with rivers and with the native flora and fauna of a region, and that you can respect that and enforce it through rights. And they appointed legal guardians to enforce the rights of this river. And I'll talk about a movement picking up. Since then, about 10 other rivers or basins, which is a watershed basically, in Colombia have been recognized as having rights. So courts just all over the place are now saying nature has rights, and we're going to enforce those. Maybe that'll happen in the United States soon. Maybe not in the Supreme Court right away, but we'll see what happens in the next couple of years with the composition of that court. It is possible. And, I'm sure you've learned from the first session that, 40 years ago or so, the U.S. Supreme Court almost recognized the rights of nature. It was in a dissent in the Sierra Club versus Morton case, and where Justice Douglas wanted to give ecosystems standing, which was standing in a courtroom, meaning you're the party in a courtroom, basically means it's one element of having rights. I'm almost through this background, and then we'll talk about some fun case studies. Colombian Amazon declared to have rights in Colombia by their highest court, Supreme Court there, or rather the Constitutional Court. This was a case much like Our Children's Trust case in the United States, where a group of young persons sued the government for climate change inaction, and the court said, "You're right. Your rights have been violated as children. You have environmental rights to a healthy climate, which deforestation of the Amazon was furthering climate change, as we know." And then the court went further and said, "And the entire Colombian Amazon has rights, and future generations of humans have rights." And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So it's kind of the trifecta: rights of nature, rights of future generations, and human environmental rights. That's what I want to see every court fighting for, every court making rulings for all over the world. Those three things I think are so important together. And really, it spans the rights of humans and nature and future humans. And that's really what they call there an intergenerational pact for life. And I think we need that mindset. There has been some controversy, when they made this decision. They didn't really consult local communities who were living in the Amazon, who felt like this ruling kind of surprised them. They were like, rights for the Amazon? I didn't even hear about this before. And so kind of the lesson learned here, still a really cool ruling, but there's some work to do to implement it. But the lesson learned here is when implementing rights of nature, or really any new legal paradigm, you really want the consultation and the input from local communities. You want to make sure it's kind of, if it's national or international, it still has an element of grassroots involvement, and it comes from the very on the ground community level. And so I think keep seeking those landmark sweeping rulings, but be sure to consult communities to have their input and their buy-in, because you really want it to be put into place at the local level. Finally, so we've talked about national constitutional stuff, court rulings. There's also a movement to recognize rights of nature regionally and locally and at the state level. So we've worked with Santa Monica on sustainability rights, we call them. So the idea that nature has a right to sustainability. And that's been implemented through local plans at the city level through their sustainability plan, and saying, what does nature's rights really mean in practice locally? Well, it means we have to transition to 100% renewable within 20 years. It means we have to create, we have to further urban biodiversity through enforceable metrics. It means we have to have, local organic food programs where we support, local or regional farming efforts that are sustainable, and so forth. So check that out if you want an example of what rights of nature can mean at the local level in a way that's enforceable and actually results in some meaningful protections. You've probably, if you're follow the movement, heard of the Lake Erie Bill of Rights, and that is a really cool initiative to say that Lake Erie has rights, and we're going to enforce that through these stronger clean water standards. It's had some challenges in the court due to basically preemption, where state and national law is hostile to and overrules in many cases strong local laws. But it's been exciting to watch Lake Erie itself fighting for its rights in the court. And in Florida, you've probably seen several counties are seeking rights of nature recognition, and I know Orange County has a local referendum, and Professor Stewart, I'm sure, knows all about that. I just know a little bit about it, but it's exciting to watch. Okay, let me talk about this last case study, and then we'll move on to some of Earth Law Center stuff. So the DNC Council on the Environment and Climate Crisis, which is affiliated with DNC, the Democratic National Commission, committee, but operates independently, came out with a set of an environmental platform, basically, that it hoped the DNC itself adopted. But even if they don't adopt it, it's a kind of a standalone document that's like, we as leaders within the Democratic Party and some of the foremost thinkers on environmental issues think this is the future of environmental politics and environmental law in the United States. And they released a statement that said amongst their recommendations for the platform for the DNC was to establish a commission similar to the President's Council on Sustainable Development to explore incorporating rights of nature principles into U.S. law. And this was really notable for a number of reasons. I guess the main one is never before had a national platform like that embraced the rights of nature to any extent. And this really shows what was a fringe movement 10 or 12 years ago, largely theoretical with the exception of Ecuador and Bolivia, has become a mainstream, not an extreme, but a mainstream movement. Growing number of politicians and larger, big green environmental organizations are supporting this. And I think it really is the future of governance in the United States, and a blueprint to live in harmony with nature, because once nature has rights, it changes society. Think about perspectives of gay rights before and after gay rights were recognized, and think about the respect for women before and after their rights were recognized. It really changes society. It's a blueprint for new ways to protect nature, and a strong backbone for a new generation of ecosystem restoration, which is what we really need. And ultimately, the Democratic Party didn't adopt this recommendation, but it's still there, and I'm encouraged that in the coming 4 years, maybe they'll adopt at the state level rights of nature commissions or councils to explore rights of nature. Maybe they'll do it federally still, or you can do it locally. So I think it's just kind of an exciting blueprint for politicians to look at and find inspiration from. And I wrote a little op-ed about it, so check that out if you're interested. There's the title up there on the right. All right, let me talk a little bit about Earth Law Center and our work, and take about 20 minutes, then we'll open for questions. It's kind of our big vision. I'm a pragmatist. I want to change the world, but I'm also not trying to just do something for fun. You know, I want to win, and here's how I think us and our partners, because working with partners is key. Here's how I think we can win. What Earth Law Center does, we draft model laws giving rights to nature. I'll talk about a few of those. And then we work to train legislative champions in different countries. So, you know, ultimately, rights of nature, I hope, will be adopted in countries around the world. And then we work with them to pass and implement laws. I think this is a scalable model. Create model laws, work with champions, pass those laws that can be adopted globally, which means we can win in every single country. The same time, obviously, each country is different. Their politics, their economic system, their the culture there, and so, you know, the same model law in every country won't be the same. But I think having a legislative starting point, something to work from, is really important. We've seen examples of model laws being passed all over the world. There's cybersecurity laws that are largely the same in all sorts of countries, most countries worldwide. You know, you can think of endangered species laws or clean water laws are very similar in many countries, and so we can do this. And then we talk about a couple of the templates we have. We have templates on ocean rights. What's it mean to give rights to marine or ocean ecosystems? Check that out on our website. We have templates on coral reefs. What does it mean if coral reefs had their own rights, were considered persons under the law? You could create an office of rights of coral reefs. You could put into place the most cutting edge coral reefs protections to enforce those rights. I think the countries that are, and states like Hawaii and countries like Palau that are banning harmful sunscreens are doing really cool stuff, and then doing more to protect coral reefs from illegal fishing and so forth, and allow their restoration. Legal rights for marine species, including southern resident orcas. We have template language on that we're sharing with people all over the world. And then I want to talk a little bit about the rights of rivers. This is something we launched a couple weeks ago in partnership with International Rivers, but there's all sorts of organizations who are sponsoring it. And please get on the website, rightsofrivers.org, if you want to endorse this or become a sponsoring organization. It's totally open source, something I hope anyone will use, and that Earth Law Center, you know, really doesn't have any ownership over. It's a gift to the planet and to our partners. But, you know, what does the rights of rivers mean? Well, in this document, it establishes that rivers have a right to flow. And by the way, we made this document in working with scientists, with policymakers, with people in government, with indigenous leaders, with all sorts of folks, and said, you know, how do we really put rights of rivers into practice in a pragmatic way? And this is what we came up with. It talks about the right to flow, which means, you know, potentially, and I'll talk about this in a second, free from dams, but also having sufficient flows or ecological flows. The right to perform essential functions within its ecosystem. The right to be free from pollution. The right to feed and be fed by sustainable aquifers. The right to native biodiversity, and the right to regeneration and restoration. Again, that is key, that we allow nature to restore itself to health. And so this is sort of a legislative starting point I'm sharing with governments all over the world, and I'll talk about where it's being put into place. I want to mention, sorry, it's a mouthful of text or a page full of text, but I want to mention this challenging provision just kind of as an insider thing. We put in a clause, as paragraph 9, the infamous paragraph 9. We put in a clause about how do we address dams from the perspective of the rights of rivers. In my mind, you know, big dam projects are incompatible with the rights of rivers. They choke them off, they devastate them. I'm actually calling for dam projects all over the world to no longer be considered renewable or green energy under local policy, because it's only renewable in the sense that, you know, the water keeps churning out the electricity, but it's not renewable because you're destroying ecosystems and drying up wetlands and so forth with these mega dam projects. And so the idea that renewable is just wrong. So how did we encapsulate this in this Declaration of the Rights of Rivers? Well, we've just went as absolutely far as we could to, you know, oppose new dam projects saying that, dams shall only be allowed when they're absolutely necessary to achieve a social and ecological purpose that cannot be met by other reasonable means. And we talked about the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous and other impacted communities, because oftentimes these mega dams and small hydro, which is equally devastating in its own way, are put up without local support and actually in opposition to local communities. So that's what we said, but then we also put forth our vision of that we want to incrementally progress towards a dam-free world in a manner that is respectful of the rights of humans and non-human communities that have adapted to the status quo. Because actually in some places where there's dams, some ecosystems have adapted to that, even though they're devastating other ecosystems, and some human communities have adapted to that. So we need to be conscious about how we allow ecosystems to restore themselves and do it in a pragmatic and smart way. So this is a compromise we had. Some partners were like, no, just no dam. The declaration has to say no dams. Others were like, look, it's like, we know dams are bad, but we have to do our best and incrementally progress. And so here's the compromise we came up with. If you have any feedback about it, email me about it. Be interested. So here's our friends, and sorry about the blurry picture. Here's our friends in Nigeria, led by Dafe Iri Kefe. And this is kind of an example of Earth Law Center's theory of change, where we try to equip partners with model legislation and train them and help them implement laws. Dafe Iri Kefe is an amazing advocate for the rights of rivers in Nigeria. And we've been working with him to establish the rights of the first river in Nigeria, the River Ethiop, this magical river that bubbles up from a cottonwood tree and has this amazing clean water, at least where it comes out, and then becomes increasingly polluted. And he's working to establish the rights of this river based on our models and the declaration. And we're having a meeting with a seminar or a summit with Nigerian lawmakers and stakeholders from across the country next month. So we're really excited about the progress there. Another example of a recent success, we were working with the Nez Perce tribe, specifically tribal leaders within their general council, which is the body in which all Nez Perce members have a vote, so kind of a general council. So we were working with leaders there to inform them about rights of rivers, and they came up with a rights of the Snake River resolution. I think in the United States, really some of the exciting places for the future of this movement is with Native American and indigenous peoples, Native Hawaiians as well, because many indigenous peoples worldwide have always recognized that ecosystems are alive, that humans have a duty to respect them, and they have some element of rights. And with the Snake River, you've seen this resolution that was passed by the Nez Perce. They talk about the Nez Perce have always believed that rivers are alive and tried to live in harmony with them. The Nez Perce rely upon a healthy Snake River to exercise their own rights. So really, rights of the Snake River is a indigenous rights issue, that they use it for cultural, religious, and spiritual activities. And going to the next slide, and they understand that they wish to harmonize their own legal system with their belief that the Snake River is alive. So really, in this sense, it's the idea of we've always believed these things. Let's put it in a way that's respected in Western law. And so it's an assertion of their own rights and sovereignty. The rights they recognize are the rights to exist, flourish, evolve, flow, regenerate, and to be restored. The flow thing is interesting because there's a movement to remove some dams on the lower Snake River that are just devastating salmon populations. And because who feeds on the salmon? Well, amongst other species, southern resident orcas in the ocean, because salmon are anadromous fish species. They live in fresh and salt water. And so removing these dams is essential to prevent the extinction of orcas, of this population of orcas, and also to restore ecosystems. And so the right to flow of the Snake River will be, I think, a point of support for that movement. So here's kind of awkward place for this map, but here's some of the places we're working on rights of nature along with our partners, and where it's been established as well. You can see it's kind of all over the world. Another place where seeking rights of rivers is in Mexico. If anyone knows what modern day city this is, It is Mexico City. So it used to be a giant water city, at Tenochtitlan, an Aztec capital, and before that, just a massive lake. That's, if you've been to Lake Washington in Seattle and thereabouts, I calculated it's 40 times as large as that. Now it's completely built over by Mexico City. Yay! So we're seeking to give rights to rivers there, and we're actually in conversation with lawmakers nationally in Mexico to recognize the rights of rivers. This is Colima, Mexico, where we worked with lawmakers to recognize rights of nature in their state constitutional amendment that they passed last year. And 3 states in Mexico now recognize the rights of nature. So there's an exciting statewide movement there. Just a couple of insights I want to give on guardianship. So how do you enforce the rights of nature? In many places, you appoint legal guardians to enforce those rights. And we're still kind of figuring out the best way to do that. Who speaks for the trees? Everyone's been asked. And in this case, it's legal guardian. So, think a child might have a legal guardian, a disabled person might have a legal guardian who has a fiduciary legal duty to represent the rights and interests. And we're beginning to see nature have legal guardians that have a legal obligation to represent their rights. What we've been pushing for in Mexico are to have, in the context of rivers, are to have national water guardians who represent all water, and then to have regional water guardians that represent a watershed. So imagine if each watershed had its own regional guardian who had a legal duty. That means you can enforce it in court to protect that watershed. We're also working to establish best practices for who is named a legal guardian. It can't just be anyone. And some of the stuff we're saying is that you have to have sufficient skill, knowledge, and experience to really ensure you have the capacity to enforce the rights of watersheds. We're also saying that, look, amongst the regional and national water guardians, you have to have sufficient representation from women, from indigenous peoples, from different groups. So this isn't, just a male-dominated, majority-dominated position. We need to really connect the rights of nature movement to, parallel movements for equality and social justice, and giving a voice to people who don't have one. And I think legal guardianship is one way we can connect rights of nature to, what we see in the United States right now, movements for social justice and rights, Black Lives Matter. If I was to set up a legal guardianship body in the United States and I wrote out the rules, I would say it has to, it should be at least half women. It needs to represent diversity and different viewpoints, and it needs to have indigenous representation and so forth. And we're writing that into that sort of thing into law in Mexico right now. They also need money, cash money. Money is so important in these things. We saw in Colombia a guardianship body set up and didn't have enough money, and it was kind of a disaster at first. They're starting to remedy that and provide some funding, and for them to operate sufficiently, you need enough money for them to do their job. So put money in the budget when you establish these things. Working in British Columbia on the rights of rivers, and really they're being inspired by New Zealand because there's a lot of similarities. We can skip this and move on to here. In the Balkans as well, we're working to establish the rights of rivers there. There's thousands of small hydro dams being put up. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And let me just talk a little bit about how rights of rivers can translate to practical policy measures. In the Balkans, we're saying rivers have rights, and how do you enforce that? Well, you can enforce it through minimum flows. That's a practical policy tool to enforce the rights of rivers. You can enforce it by requiring environmental impact statements, even for small hydro, which currently isn't the case. And also, we need to have environmental impact assessments be cumulative. Oftentimes, in some places, environmental impact assessments look at an ecosystem in a vacuum and just for one project, but really you need to look at the cumulative effect of all activities impacting an ecosystem. We want to end subsidies for hydro in Eastern Europe. And I mentioned globally, we really need to see hydropower no longer be counted as renewable energy. And of course, each place you want to look at it specifically, but that policy is just really encouraging this onslaught of hydro that's killing some of the last free-flowing rivers in the world. Eastern Europe is called the blue heart of Europe because it has many of the last free-flowing rivers, actually the only last free-flowing rivers in Europe. And these hydropower subsidies and renewable energy incentives are just causing thousands of dams to be planned and built in these last free-flowing rivers, and it has to stop. So, what does rights of nature mean? It means a legal and cultural shift. It means living in harmony with ecosystems, but it also means really practical policy tools that we can put into place right now as a means of breathing life into rights of rivers. And think the same thing. Human environmental rights, you can say, well, does that mean that's vague? Well, there's all these practical policy tools you can use to give effect to that right now. And the same is for rights of nature. We're working in France to establish rights of rivers. The City Council of Paris is looking at giving rights to the Seine River. And also they're looking at daylighting the Bièvre River. And this is it on the left before they built over it entirely. It's one of many rivers that have been built over, like in Mexico City, New York City, London, that have been built over by megacities, by megapolises. And that some cities are looking at restoring them. And I think that should be part of rights of those rivers. It's really symbolic to daylight a river or give it its freedom and enforcement of its right just to exist. I mentioned rights for coral reefs. I'm just going to blast through this one. We submit amicus briefs all over the world. In Latin America, especially, we're submitting them in 5 or 6 countries right now, arguing for the rights of nature in the courts. We just submitted one. This is Los Cedros. It's a cloud forest in Ecuador that's at risk for mining concessions that would cover, I believe, 80% of this protected area that would go to a state mining company in Ecuador that is affiliated with 2 Canadian mining companies. By the way, Canada is like a tax haven for mining companies. It has, I think, 3 times as many large mining companies as the United States. So they really need to crack down on that. But we submitted an amicus brief, which basically is a brief submitted by outside experts, us and some partners, saying that, look, in Ecuador, where you recognize the rights of nature, you really need to put this into practice in a meaningful way. And we gave them some tips on how to establish guardianship bodies, how to uphold human environmental rights in parallel with the rights of nature, and how to protect this ecosystem with rights of nature. It could be a landmark decision coming out of Ecuador, so keep an eye on it. If anyone here knows an upcoming court case where a brief on behalf of the rights of nature would benefit, a judge could learn from it, let us know. We have templates available. We're happy to share them. You could submit it. We could submit it with you. Lots of possibilities. We're looking to submit more in the United States this year and next year, as well as in Canada and globally. And so far, judges who have seen our amicus briefs have been receptive to them. One was quoted extensively in Brazil, and a judge ordered the protection of, in Mexico, and a judge ordered the protection of 2 rivers there. And I'm hopeful that these briefs help educate judges basically, and gives them some new tools to call for the protection of ecosystems, because judges are individuals. Many of them believe that, or understand, let's not say believe, they understand that we're in an ecological crisis and want to do something about it. And, there's strong arguments based on the law to do so, based on the rights of humans, the rights of nature, and so forth. And if we can educate judges who might not know otherwise about, these legal movements that are happening all over the world to recognize ecosystem rights, oftentimes they'll do the right thing. It just takes a good legal argument and a little bit of bravery for a judge to do so. And again, the law has always evolved. Judges have changed their mind on countless things as society's belief systems evolved. And if we can empower and train judges to understand the rights of nature movement and to give them tools to create a reasonable legal argument to back it up. And again, I'm in the business of reasonable legal arguments. I think we'll see more landmark rulings. Earth Law Center also highlights that human environmental rights and rights of nature are interconnected. We call that when both are violated, we call it co-violations of rights. We have a report on that if you want to check it out. I want to quickly mention international law. The UNGA, the General Assembly, has passed a bunch of resolutions on harmony with nature. This is a program that's been going on for 10 years now or a little longer, the UN Harmony with Nature Initiative. Every single year they have hearings, release a report about current updates and in developments in the law and policy and economics on living in harmony with nature, and then write a resolution that the General Assembly passes. There's a lot of important information on the rights of nature there. They haven't explicitly endorsed it, but I think the fact that they're writing about it in the United Nations is really cool. So check out that program. And then the IUCN, they actually explicitly have endorsed the rights of nature and included it in their work priorities. They aim to secure the rights of nature, and we're working with them to make that a reality. There's going to be a lot of stuff on the rights of nature at the IUCN conference, World Congress, that was delayed from this summer, but will be early next year, I think. And then the Convention on Biological Diversity it's another initiative of ours with partners, and we're about to launch a website on this. So if you're interested and want to join the website and just be part of this coalition, let me know. But let me tell you about it. So there's a post-2020 framework for how to implement the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's a treaty that protects biological diversity, I think signed by every country in the world except for the United States, of course. Big surprise. And in their post-2020 plans, they included a line for, how are we going to implement this treaty in the coming decade? And they said, well, we're going to encourage countries to consider and recognize where appropriate the rights of nature. And, I think it's always appropriate to recognize the rights of nature, but I understand why they put that language in there. But really, there's all these big biodiversity things happening. And there's a 2019 mega report, they call it, on biodiversity from the United Nations. And they recognize in this report 21 separate times that we need transformative change to recognize, to save our planet from biodiversity collapse. And then there was, in 2020, the Leaders Pledge for Nature just came out. 60 heads of state and government signed this pledge for nature. And once again, they use the term transformative change is needed. And I think we're seeing that mainstream governments, international treaty bodies, countries across the world are recognizing, formally, internally, and now externally through formal statements and policies, that transformative change is absolutely needed urgently in the next coming years to solve the environmental crisis. We have 10 years to solve climate change, 10 years. And that's science-based, before we're unable to avoid the very worst impacts of climate change, and some of the impacts of which we're obviously experiencing this very moment, such as through wildfires. And so, again, this is rights of nature, ecocentric law, earth-centered law, living in harmony with nature. This stuff isn't a pipe dream. It's not some fringe movement. It's becoming the majority. More countries are supporting it. It's happening all over the world. And it is the future. And now, as much as any time, is our chance to embrace it and to put it into place. And here's a little, my best guess at how far along we are of the diffusion of an early model. I think we're in the tail end of the early adopter stage. I mentioned all this precedent. I mean, that really amounts to something in my mind. Again, 15 years ago, there was Bupkis. 12 years ago, just a couple examples, and now dozens or hundreds, I believe, of examples of rights of nature. So that's where we were 10 to 15 years ago. This stuff is cooking. I think really soon we're going to be in the early majority stage, and I hope in 10 years we'll be in the late majority stage. I think I'm just going to talk for under 10 more minutes, then Q&A, and so let me just blast through this. But the last 10 years we've been experimenting with rights of nature, and now I think we've learned a lot, so we can do it in a more sophisticated and complex manner. A couple of things I want to highlight are, we need more sophisticated bodies of legal guardians, and we need legal guardianship to represent nature, not just in the courts, but also in legislative bodies. We have an initiative to give legislative seats to nature, which would be represented by their legal guardians. So what if your local city council had a position for a forest or wetland or marine ecosystem? I think that should be the case, because they need a voice in our governance. You can have nature have a voice in executive branches of government. So for example, a commission, a executive commission on the rights of nature, where it's the president appoints members of this commission to represent the rights of nature and governance. So stuff like that we can do. We can really integrate nature's voice into all areas of our government. It can be very sophisticated, and it can work by creating, you know, applicable, enforceable rules that ensure transparency and integrity of the process. Now, I also want to see nature start having delegates at international treaty negotiations. We have a program on this as well. I'm hopeful at the next treaty negotiations, we'll see nature at least have a couple delegates representing it. And we need to see more courts with expertise in the rights of nature and ecocide. If Ecuador has taught us anything, it's that we need judges who specialize in the rights of nature and understand how it works and can come up with good practical decisions enforcing it. And, you know, that's what judges do, and they just need to be trained in it. Okay, let's ignore the rights of nature for a second, and I'm just going to mention some other movements that together comprise Earth Law. So Earth Law is what we call the broader movement towards ecocentric law or Earth-centered law. Of course, rights of nature is so central to that, but there's also these other legal movements that try to basically harmonize human law with the Earth's laws, and that's why we call ourselves Earth lawyers, because we fight for the Earth's laws to be recognized and enforced. Ecocide is, there's a goal to say ecocide's a crime at the International Court of Justice, and now France is proposing to make ecocide a law, so no more impunity for companies that destroy ecosystems. They're going to be held accountable. And actually a bunch of countries recognize ecocide in the context of a war crime, because, you know, there's a tactic of war, which is a war crime, is to destroy a whole ecosystem as a way of devastating a human population. But, you know, we're kind of going beyond that now with this next generation of ecocide laws. So check out Ecocide. There's actually going to be an announcement later this week about other politicians supporting making ecocide a law to build off of what France has done. Keep an eye out for that. Animal rights, I think you've already learned a bit about this, but, you know, in addition to whole ecosystems having rights, you know, animals should have individual rights as well. It's already been recognized in Argentina, where a chimpanzee was recognized as having rights. There's a whole project in the United States from the Non-Human Rights Project to use habeas corpus law, which is used to remove people from prison, and to argue that under state customary law, especially in New York, various animals are persons under the law. They're intelligent. They have capacity for emotions. They have a lot of the traits that you know we consider us having as for being persons. Now you see they're a little different than the rights of nature, and I think you talked about this because you know, the rights of nature is not so focused on, you know, the intelligence and the emotion, the ability to experience emotions, and more focused on whole ecosystems. But both movements are really important, and there's a lot going on here. So check out the Non-Human Rights Project for sure. They're doing just awesome work. The right to a stable climate, I think, and human environmental rights more broadly is part of this field of Earth law. There's the Agenda case in the Netherlands, where their highest court said, ordered their legislative branch to take stronger action on climate change and enforcement of the human right to a healthy climate. Basically, they said that the government had violated the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, and ordered a reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions targets. Compare that to Juliana in the United States, which was an amazing case that really did a lot for the movement, but thus far it hasn't been successful, but it's still going. I'm hopeful. But in that case, unlike in the Netherlands, our court said that you know, these young persons who brought the suit didn't have standing in court. And, you know, basically the reason was, you know, even if we do what you say, we're not going to solve climate change. I think that's dumb because, you know, if everyone, you know, worked together, we would. But oh well. But they'll keep fighting. And then, you know, also they said, you know, us as a court, we can't tell the legislative branch what to do. This is a political decision of the legislative branch. Well, the court in your agenda said, you know, we can't tell the legislative branch how to do it, but we can tell them what to do. We can say, hey, legislative branch, lower greenhouse gas emissions. You're the politicians. You figure out how to do it. That's not our job. Juliana, they said, oh, we can't tell you what to do or how to do it. So I think they're wrong. They were right in the Netherlands, but they'll keep fighting. The Our Children's Trust folks will keep fighting, and we'll see. Rights of future generations is part of what we consider to be Earth law or ecocentric law. You know, people not alive today are getting royally screwed over because we've messed the whole system up and are on the verge of destroying the planet. Not quite there. And I think they have rights as well, because they're going to exist and inherit our mess. And there's some precedent to recognize their rights, such as in the Philippines, in a 1993 Supreme Court case. So check that out. All this is in our book. If you take Professor Stewart's class, you're going to be experts in all this stuff. Since many of you are probably in Florida, you know, also part of Earth law or ecocentric law is indigenizing the law. And this is a case we're working on where we're representing Native American Lummi elders in the state of Washington in their quest to seek the return of Scully Chucktana, who's known as Lolita in Miami. And she's a captive orca. She was captured 50 years ago, believe it or not, and then brought to this tiny little tank at the Miami Sea Aquarium. I encourage you not to spend your money there. She was brought to this tiny little tank at the Miami Sea Aquarium and has been captive there for 50 years. She came with another friend of hers who rammed his head against the side of the wall of the tank until he died. I don't think you're legally allowed to say he committed suicide, but you know, you just heard what happened. And people have been trying to get Scully Chucktana out for decades, also known as Tokate, by the way. So you can look up the word Tokate. And PETA has been fighting for her release along with other groups. You know, the courts in Florida have basically said, you know, they've acknowledged, yeah, southern resident orcas like her are endangered species, but, you know, if she dies, it won't cause the extinction of the rest of the population. And they've also said, well, we acknowledge that her tank size is too small under modern animal welfare statutes, but that wasn't the case when she got there. So, you know, she's grandfathered in. So I disagree with both of those rulings and think they're wrong. But that's what they've said so far. And they're continuing to, there's another active lawsuit right now. So we'll see. But we're using this law, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA, to argue for her release. There's no litigation yet, but you know, that's what we're looking at. And you know, basically the argument there goes is that Scully Chucktana is sacred to the Lummi people. And the Lummi people have always believed that orcas are their relatives under the sea, their family members, and that they're sacred to them. This is their longstanding belief system. And so, you know, they're basically arguing that they want to see the return of this sacred entity that was stolen from where they live, which is by the Salish Sea in Washington State, where she was taken from. You know, they also believe, since she's family members, that basically she was kidnapped and taken from them as well. And so, you know, we're their legal team in this campaign. I think this is an example of taking indigenous belief systems, that ecosystems are family members. You know, this is an idea of ocean kinship, that people have a kinship, a familial relationship with marine ecosystems or other ecosystems, and trying to translate that into Western law. And in this case, this NAGPRA law. So I think the job of Earth lawyers with respect to indigenous rights is to, you know, listen to indigenous peoples and say, you know, I'd love to learn about your belief systems, and how can I help you enforce those through the Western legal system, which, you know, unfortunately doesn't respect all of your rights and customs. But I think we can do a lot to bridge the two belief systems. And, you know, that's our job at Earth Law Centers, Earth Lawyers. And what we hope to do in this case, we hope to bring her home. Her mom is still in the Salish Sea in the wild. Her mom is the orca that's thought to be her mom is, I believe, in her 80s now. Scully Chucktana is again, she's like 54, and she still sings the same songs her mom taught her. And we've got to get her out of this. Got to get her out of this tank. So keep updated on this. And indigenous people around the world are supporting her release. Just a couple more minutes. This is the textbook where Professor Stewart has an amazing chapter in there, and that's been obviously a source of a lot of the material. And there's tons of great contributors: Earth Law, Emerging Ecocentric Law. We want to see this taught in every law school in the entire United States as part of their maybe second year curriculum, because we think lawyers need to be trained not only in what the law is, but what it ought to be to save the planet. And you know, I'm encouraged that a lot of people here will become, you know, the Earth lawyers of tomorrow. And we're also launching, Professor Stewart, we got to talk if I need your help. We're also launching an Earth Law Society that we hope is going to be an ecocentric rival to the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society has, you know, 60,000 attorneys on it. A bunch of Supreme Court justices are past or current members. I think the majority of the Supreme Court now. They just started in 1982 with a group of a couple hundred students who got together and made this up. And now they're ridiculously powerful. So we need a legal society that rivals the Federalist Society in strength and influence, but is fighting for the rights and interest of nature and human environmental rights. We need Supreme Court justices, politicians, and so forth to be trained. Again, our goal is tens of thousands of lawyers, politicians, judges, advocates, scientists, etc., trained in this field. Just concluding thoughts. You know, approaches to advancing new legal paradigms, just generally, including the rights of nature, but also whatever you're interested in. You know, go for the glory, go for constitutional amendments where you can, but you need to start somewhere, and you can always start with a resolution or a statement of intent or creating a commission like they talked about with the DNC. So just do something. I think we need to appeal more to judges. You know, they're listening and they understand the scope of the crisis. We need to create replicable models because we need not just one place, but many everywhere to put this stuff into place. So if you have a little victory somewhere, you know, do a write-up and send it to a bunch of peers and other places and say, hey, use this. And support Indigenous rights in your work. And Indigenous rights and social justice movements and many other movements to really enforce rights are all seeking the same future, that's a better and more equitable future for society. And so let's all support each other. A couple other keys to win is we need a heck of a lot of money. It's been estimated the whole rights of nature movement globally, all that cool stuff I talked about, has a combined budget of $3 million, which is probably about as much as your local Olive Garden restaurant. So that's ridiculous. So if you know any wealthy philanthropists who literally want to hopefully save the planet, contribute to rights of nature organizations, your money goes so far. Our organization, all that stuff I talked about, has a budget of $300,000 a year. So that's literally, you know, how much probably a billionaire made during the length of the sentence that I'm now ending. And so donate. Also become politicians. We need more dreamers to be politicians. We also need more large environmental organizations that have huge amounts of money to support the rights of nature. That's actually starting to happen. And they need to make sure to support groups who've been in the field for a long time. Accept a new normal. You know, rights of nature will change a couple things, and just, you know, accept that, and it's a good thing. We changed a lot during coronavirus. It's been a struggle, but we can do it, and we can change a lot for a better future. And you know, keep connecting rights of nature to other legal and economic movements. You know, it ties into social justice. It ties into the degrowth movement. It ties into so many things. And so keep making those connections. And what can you do? Well, we kind of talked about that, but most of all, keep fighting and never stop, and do what you can. So that's all. A couple of minutes longer than I'd hoped, but we got 22 minutes for questions.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so we're going to open up the floor now. I do have some questions in the chat to share first, but if you would like to ask your question, just do the little raise your hand icon, and I will unmute you. So I'm just going to start off with the ones that we got in the chat. The first one is just a quick logistical one. Someone asked if the summit in Nigeria will be open to the public. Is that something they can view virtually?
It's going to be live streamed, and I'll send a link. Yeah, we're also going to make a little video about it. It's like 2 or 3 minutes, because most people, usually myself included, have that length of attention span. So yeah, check out for the video, but if we'll post some details on our Facebook. So follow us on Facebook if you don't already, and we'll make sure to get it up there. So yeah, we're pretty excited about that, especially because lawmakers are involved now and they seem to want to do the right thing. There's also a big movement in Nigeria. Watch the Daily Show segment on it for especially young people demanding an end to the secret special police force that just like raids people with impunity. So there's a lot of a movement there for rights enforcement. So I think the time is ripe for change in all sorts of areas in Nigeria.
Great, thank you. So the next one is, I agree with the concerns about dams and don't support building more, but it begs the question, where do you see the best way to get power, solar, wind, etc.?
Yeah, I'm in support of solar. I'm also, in support of, I'd say, degrowth. So, using less energy than we are currently using. So, a combination of those things, you get into the lesser evil conversation. For me, fracking's off the table in the lesser evil category. That's just evil. It's not lesser evil. Dams, obviously, we get a lot of power from them, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It's roaring with power. Let's start with the dams that we absolutely do not need. There's thousands of dams that provide a very small amount of power and that are devastating rivers. The ones I talked about on the Snake River provide a very small amount of power and are unnecessary. And so let's get rid of those to start. I think if we can remove thousands of dams that are the high priority ones while stopping new mega dam projects from being put into place, hopefully solar will be even better and be longer lasting and, require less fossil fuels to develop and so forth. So, that's kind of my answer there. I know it's an imperfect science, but let's also, I think, state our commitment, what our goals are. And to me, again, the goal is dam-free society, healthy rivers, clean energy that's, as least impactful as possible, and degrowth. Let's use less, let's consume less. Those are all good goals. So let's state that and start heading that direction.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Nope, sorry. Oh, wait, hold on. Somebody is joining us. Let me admit them. There we go. Okay. So yeah, the next person asked about, said you mentioned a couple of legal tools that can be used to implement rights of nature. What has been the most effective? So I imagine this is referring to the guardianship and, all different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think what's been most effective is when there's, a couple of ingredients to the secret recipe. One, when there's government and, other thought leaders, especially indigenous leaders, on board together with the shared goal of restoration. That's been the case in New Zealand, where they've had the shared goal of co-management and restoration, and let's work together to enforce these rights. And as opposed to situations where the government is hostile to the idea of the rights of nature, is often the case in the United States, and also with some of these court decisions. So I think that's important. Mutual government, civil society, indigenous leader buy-in. I think another thing that's been effective, again, where there's funding to put it into place, is important. And then where there's oversight and enforcement. In Santa Monica, I mentioned they had a rights to nature ordinance, and in the first couple of years, there wasn't much oversight or enforcement, and so nothing really happened. And you don't want rights of nature to be there in name only. You want it to be enforced. And then civil society came out and started going to hearings and saying, look, you passed this inspiring rights of nature law, and you're not reporting on your progress. And we really put some pressure on them. And then they, agreed to begin doing annual reports on implementation, to create more specific benchmarks on implementation, and to have hearings on it. So, I think that gets to, transparency, progress reporting, and kind of capacity building, just making sure they're putting this stuff into practice in a practical way. So, it's kind of been, you also need some patience, I think. There's been some fair critiques of the movement that there hasn't been enough implementation. But again, in terms of rights-based movements, it's very new. So I think you just need a little bit of patience with it. I'll tell you, if someone gave me $1 million, I would spend half of that on enforcement squads, just making sure it's put into place. And so again, I think that's kind of a lack of capacity issue. But as more awareness and as more victories happen, there's going to be more people paying attention to enforcement. And I think that's a good thing. More watchdogs.
Yeah, and this next question kind of builds on that in terms of, you know, having that more comprehensive oversight and approach to these things. Says, what is the role of ecological scientists such as ecosystems and conservation biologists in the rights of nature movement? And what is the growth potential here for developing globally applicable standards for observation, measurement, validation, etc.?
Oh, it's so important. The science part is so key. So yeah, the policy just, you know, is fueled by the science, obviously, and, you know, ecological scientists, which I guess I understand, to scientists who really look at the overall health of an ecosystem and how it all functions together, needs to fuel the policy. And I think, you know, some of the developments that I'm seeing that are exciting are, you know, understanding how all the components of a watershed function together to have a healthy watershed. And again, just, you know, the water in the river within a watershed is just one tiny piece of the overall ecological health of that larger system. Unfortunately, the Clean Water Act, you know, what it cares about is the water between the embankments that a ship can go down to ship goods down the river, and that's such a small piece of this watershed. So we need more, you know, more scientists, you know, really emphasizing the policymakers. Look, you need to look at this entire system because everything is interconnected, and to look at the water, just the water between these embankments here is just the tip of the iceberg. And then, you know, I think more scientists are, you know, really understanding the complexity of living systems and understanding that there's an intelligence to nature. You know, this gets to this idea of plant personhood, that there's these little societies and sophistication and means of communication amongst, you know, things like plants and trees and networks of trees, you know, with communities, and they literally speak to each other through their roots and through the chemicals that they release, and they warn each other of things, and they nourish each other. When one tree lacks the proper nutrients, another one will nourish it like a family member. And I think, you know, again, I don't want to necessitate an understanding of intelligence as for rights, but as you know, if we look deeper at ecosystems, we see that they're, you know, basically they vastly exceed our understanding of their complexity, and there's so much we don't know about them. And you know, that's just another reason to, you know, respect them and to allow them to be themselves, to allow them to thrive in their own way, instead of thinking that we can control them, or that we can you know, tinker with them, or that we can that we know what's best for them. You know, I'm sure in Professor Stewart's class you go into the history of the, you know, the modern environmental movement in our modern legal system, and a lot of it arises from this hubris that we can control nature. It's as if it's a giant clock that we can tinker with and fix and change and move and replace from in one place, destroy in one place and replace it in another, as we do often with wetlands. And our knowledge is so limited. You know, we're just beginning to realize that there's how much we don't know. And I think our laws need to reflect that, the complexity of nature and our lack of understanding for nature, by letting nature, you know, be itself. One of my colleagues, Jonathan Keats, is really encouraging me to start pushing for nature's right to go at its own pace, which is really acknowledging that it, you know, to allow it to be itself. And you know, that's how we keep it healthy, to you know, to not control it, but to allow it to have its freedom. And so, yeah, the science underscores all of that. And, you know, we need the most cutting edge science that understands nature as a system to influence policy. And that means, you know, integrating all these different fields together and having our policy integrate all these different ecosystems together in the way it protects them.
Yes. So, I believe this one came in when we were talking about the amicus briefs, and I think it flows really into the next question as well. So I'm going to present both of them to you.
Okay.
And it said, how much influence can a judge have when there isn't already a law in place? Do we need to pass the laws first, or spend our energy informing the judges? And then the next question that came in said, if we have 10 years, where is the best area to focus our efforts? So I think they kind of complement each other.
Yeah. 10 years, yeah. So how much influence can a judge have? Heck of a lot. There's a whole belief system of legal positivism where basically it says a judge can make whatever ruling they want and work backwards to the law. I believe that in not all contexts, but some contexts. And think just recently, think of the Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage. There was all these fights at the local and state level. Thousands of groups fighting for gay rights, right to gay marriage. Lots of states fighting for it as well, and having to kind of go against the hostile federal government. And the U.S. Supreme Court, with the exact same constitution that it looked at when it upheld laws criminalizing sodomy, so basically saying it's illegal to be gay, and we'll throw you, we can fine you for it, and the states can do that. Using that exact same constitution said gay marriage is legal, and we're going to recognize it nationally. So judges can have a lot of influence, and as much as you hear during the current Supreme Court rulings of this idea of originalism with the Constitution, all judges absolutely evolve their understanding of the law based on societal norms. And so, and judges can do a heck of a lot. So if I was a judge and I was on the bench, someone, and I saw the world dying around me, and someone gave me a really good legal argument where I could make a ruling to do something to prevent that, as an individual and as an enforcer of the law who believes that our law is there to protect our own fundamental rights, and that includes a right to a healthy environment, and that our law is there to create a habitable planet for all life. I would make a big ruling personally, and I'm seeing judges beginning to do that. So judges can have a lot of influence, certainly, but we do need laws to back them up. You want to give them a flurry of precedent to cite in their decisions. So we need legislative movements and movements in the courts simultaneously. I'd say they're equally important. What can we do in the next 10 years? Everyone has to kind of do their own thing, but I think there's a lot you can do. The big thing I would say, just for your average person, is demand to your lawmakers, bold change to the legal system. And depending what happens in a couple of weeks here now, a bunch of lawmakers are going to get into office that are empowered to do something big for the environment, and just make your voice heard, that you demand something that's transformative and significant. And I think politicians will listen to you. I think of course there's lots of stuff you can do individually, but I'm personally of the belief system that if we want everyone to kind of change their lifestyles, that we need to hear it from the top and make it binding. But great on you if in your own lifestyle you're living as sustainably as you can. That's great. And then I think just try to link a lot of these cutting edge movements to each other in whatever field you make. I love the question about science, because within the field of science we need to start talking about how to transform the legal system and how science can influence that, and vice versa. And if you're involved in IP law, we have a project where ecosystems can file for patents for its own, the materials that have been its own contributions to inventions, and they should get royalties for that, which will be held in a trust and spent towards this restoration. So even IP law can be integrated into these concepts. Or if you're a business, we're launching this commitment to an ecocentric society where businesses can sign on to basically saying we need society to move towards living in harmony with nature, and we can do that through donut economics and degrowth and ecological economics, and address our addiction to consumption and so forth. So businesses can do that, and businesses can talk about the rights of nature. Education, obviously, you can teach these courses on Professor Stewart's. There's so much stuff you can do, and if you have no idea how the heck to connect this stuff to your own job, give some money, and that always helps. So we have 10 years. Bold systems change, and just do whatever you can, and elect some really progressive people.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, this is a much more specific question. They asked, what would be the ideal outcome in Lolita's case?
She's returned to the Pacific Northwest. Right now there's discussion of the best, safest way to bring her home, and to make sure that no other orcas and her family members and friends in the Salish Sea have any possible negative impact from a captive orca going to the wild. But her being returned home is the best outcome. In my mind, she has to be returned home. Her family members, her Lummi family members, and again, they recognize her as family, are demanding she is returned home. And it's a complex issue. She's been in this aquarium for 50 years, suffering. And so, the people at the aquarium basically say that's where it's safest for her to remain. But think about any complex life decision for a family member who can't speak for themselves. Let's say your relative can't talk. They're in a hospital somewhere, maybe more like a tiny tank where they can barely move. But you want to move them somewhere where it's their home, where their friends and family are, and where they're from, and to end their suffering in this tiny little place. And it's a complex decision. And who's best equipped to make that decision? I'd say it's your family member, the people who care for you most, not a group who's profiting off you and who makes you do 2 shows a day for the last 50 years for money, and is owned as a corporation. And so I want to see her brought home. There's leading scientists who support this and have plans that are developed and that are being revamped for modern conditions to make sure that she can be transported and brought home and returned to her home in the Salish Sea in Washington safely. So that's what I'm hopeful will happen. And sign our petition online for this. The Sea Aquarium where she's at is owned by another company, Palace Entertainment, that owns a bunch of different companies. That company is owned by another company, Parques Reunidos, based in Spain. It's an amusement park operator. And that company is actually owned by this investment vehicle called EQT that's in Sweden. And so EQT is the head honcho. They ultimately own everything. And, check out these companies who own them, sign the petition. We want, these parent companies, maybe the very head guy at EQT doesn't even know about this. I saw the outgoing leader at Parques Reunidos was a marine conservationist. Maybe he doesn't know about all this. I think we need to educate everyone involved and let businesses know that, indigenous rights infractions and captivity of marine mammals, let alone sacred family members, is not okay with you. And these companies listen to their customers. So let your voice be heard.
Okay, and in our last few minutes, we actually have one final question. So far, we've been ending right on the dot, so we have a good thing here. So,
yeah.
For ecocide to be enforced, do we first need to recognize the rights of ecosystems, or is it based in the idea of destroying nature for humans?
It's the former. You don't need to recognize the rights of ecosystems to enforce ecocide. As I mentioned, it kind of arose as a war crime, but more lately it's been kind of merging lanes with the rights of nature movement, because there's this understanding that we need to transform the legal system from top to bottom to save nature, and that includes the criminal part of the legal system, and that's where ecocide comes in. So I'd say they supplement each other. The rights of nature as an overarching legal paradigm would naturally invite ecocide. Let's say somewhere that recognizes the rights of nature should really look at adopting ecocide as the next step, and vice versa. France is looking at ecocide. I would encourage them to, more broadly recognize the rights of nature. Ultimately, if ecocide is adopted in a place that doesn't recognize nature's rights, it would be considered basically a crime against a human rights violation. If the rights of nature is recognized, the kind of justification for it would be that it's a crime against nature's rights and human rights. So it's sort of the justification, but I'm in support of both. I think every little nook and cranny of our legal system needs to be rewiled, just like you'd rewile a abandoned lot in your neighborhood or something. We need to rewild the law, and that includes criminal, civil, and IP law, and contracts, and everything. So this is an example of that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So this is taking us to the conclusion of today's session. Please, everyone, join me in thanking Grant Wilson from the Earth Law Center for joining us today. And be sure to follow along with the Earth Law Center for updates on, all that amazing work that they're doing and just the rights of nature movement in general. They're a really good resource for keeping up to date with these things. Just a few final housekeeping things before we conclude. If you've received any emails from our Associate Director, Jonathan Keene, please respond to them. What he's doing is gathering the information that we need to submit your attendance for your professionalism credit. So the quicker we get that information, the quicker we can get everything submitted. So next week is our last week where we will be joined by Professor Nadia Ahmad, who's going to present on environmental justice, or that sort of human rights aspect of our overall rights of nature curriculum. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Great to have you here. Take care.